Y'all, what is happening? What's goody? So, it's your boy, DameSmiff, and we're out here. And we are live here this evening from your house, America. And I just simply wanted to touch base with you guys and kind of talk about aging as a musician and aging in general, because honestly, this could help a lot of people. But aging in the sense of understanding aging, what it represents, what I've seen comes with aging for musicians, and what aging musicians have told me, the elderly, the older, the veterans, the experienced, right? And so if you are interested in conversations like this, or you think this would benefit you, make sure you hit that like button, because if you hit the like button, it basically shows more people this video, right? And if you hit subscribe or subscribe to this channel, you will see more of my content consistently, and you'll catch my newest stuff. You know how this works. You watch YouTube. So aging, what is aging and what does it look like for a musician? Well, in a nutshell, aging is just getting old, y'all. It's just days going by. You know, you're getting wrinkles and you're starting to age. You're starting to rust. You're starting to get older, right? And so what a lot of musicians tend to talk about when it comes to aging is deteriorating skill, or even deteriorating, let's say, market value or real estate in the market, you know? And a lot of times when I think of this, I try to come up with solutions as a younger man, but at the end of the day, the consistency in the issues that you see with older people are things that younger musicians should expect to deal with. So when I'm having conversations with older people and older musicians, there's not much difference in what, things they deal with as far as obviously medical things, but just typical lifestyle things. Like usually older people who aren't as active aren't doing as well as those who are as active. And that can come from a number of causes, right? Obviously, you can get a bad diagnosis. You can also be in a situation where you just had like a freak accident. Life just happens. But then on the other hand, you could have bad choices. And so what I've noticed is that most of the people who are kind of like making bad choices in life don't realize the decisions they're making and the consequences until after. But for, the general rest of the people, at least from my experience, they kind of understand their situations and know what options they have to fix them and are actually trying. So like if you see older people picking up an instrument or like trying a new skill and things like that, that's them trying to basically, stay active and stay mobile and keep their body, fresh, and that's good. And then if you have older people that are kind of stagnant, that's kind of a decision to make they've made. It's not necessarily a bad diagnosis, it's not necessarily a circumstance, it's just kind of a decision. And so what I have noticed from having conversations between these two different kinds of aging musicians and people in general is that most of the issues they have come from like uh lower back issues, muscular stuff, um cardiovascular stuff, blood, and making sure your oxygen levels are doing good and your nutrients. Food is a big one as well, right? And so when I started to kind of notice this around, I would say like leaving high school, going into college, because you meet a lot of older musicians in school, especially when you're hanging out with your teachers and your professors and things like that. You get introduced to a lot of veteran musicians, right? And so they'll bring up different issues like arthritis. They'll bring up issues like, of course, back pain, knee pain, and then of course eyesight is another one. And then the biggest ones of all that I always hear is diet and like what foods they're eating and things like that, right? And so paying attention to this stuff when I was younger made it kind of easy for me to figure out um, what options I had available as far as what I wanted to look like, feel like, and be like when I was older. And mind you, they're having these conversations not in like a dire warning kind of way, but they're having these conversations in kind of like, I'm looking out for you kind of way. And so here's some of the things that I started to figure out were the better options. So even when you're talking fitness, if you're talking money, if you're talking business or music, being able to move is like a privilege people don't realize they have. I'll say that just to put it lightly, right? So I want you to think of like the average musician, right? Typically, you would imagine them walking. So that's already a blessing. So if you have the ability to use both your legs, you should take care of them, right? Same with arms, same with fingers, eyes, noses, and hair, and all that stuff, right? Because you have it. But we can make decisions to kind of hinder these things, right? And so what I've noticed for a lot of musicians, specifically musicians, right? We spend a lot of time sitting as far as in school, writing on the, piano, maybe you're writing in your manuscript, you're on the computer, you're on Sibelius, you're on Logic, you're on Pro Tools, maybe you're on your phone or on your laptop, just marketing, doing meetings on Zoom. Maybe you're not a musician at all, but you work in the industry and you spend a lot of time on the computer. That's just your work. And then when you think about traveling, more than likely you're sitting to travel, whether it's by car, train, bus, even bicycle, right? And then outside of that, unless you're intentionally unless you're intentional about this in your lifestyle, you're more than likely doing something that's casual as a hobby, like, reading, gaming, um, social media, like you just, hang out and talk with your friends, watching movies, or maybe you get right back to playing your instrument, whatever it is. But for what I'm trying to point out to you is that for a lot of musicians, we live a sedentary lifestyle, right? And that's just musicians. Combine that with our average American lifestyle, where we just want to chill out, hang out with our friends and things like that. we tend to develop different issues in our bodies, in our health, and kind of in our mindsets about the lives we live as musicians. And so, talking to older musicians, that's something that was kind of poignant that stood out whenever I had these conversations. So, you would see people talking about business and things like that, and I noticed the businessmen who were older that were doing really well, whether it was a, man or woman, black, white, purple or green, right? The one that was working out often throughout the week, or trying to work out, or trying to work on their diet, or was mindful of that, seemed to have a better outlook on their business and their life, and then also had a little bit of a better outcome. So I point out outlook because for a lot of people, we think we're supposed to have everything together by a certain age. But some of these older musicians were kind of like either just picking up a new instrument, but had been working the whole time before that. So it's kind of like learning a new skill for them. Whereas I've had other musicians I talked to where it was like they were in the industry for years, right? And so both of those types of older musicians, if either one of them did not work out, they would have worse results from where they were. So the conversations between the two of them paralleled in that they stayed fit, or they at least had an intention to stay fit. And then they also had an intention to utilize their fitness to work, not necessarily just, to look good. So that combined with being the type of musician that just wants to be good at their instrument made me realize that there's a little bit more complexity to aging as a musician. So that pushed me into fitness. And it pushed me into fitness right around college, where I started to kind of meet more musicians around my age that were getting into fitness, but they were getting into fitness for the sake of being healthy, right? Not necessarily to be a superstar or to be on stage or anything. They just wanted to, it just felt good to work out. And so immersing myself around people like that made it kind of easier to weave fitness into my musical lifestyle. Whereas, like I just said, I had before spent a lot of time in college behind the computer, or sitting at the chair playing my horn, or writing music and things like that, or reading music, or just, doing regular average American lifestyle stuff, right? So when I started to hang out with people who were maybe playing an instrument for school, but going to school to get a degree in something else that may be either, science related or business related, or engineering related or math related, but their connection to success and fitness was always there. That made it a lot easier to do the same thing in my career path, right? And so now I'm meeting musicians who may or may not be on the same wavelength this is as far as lifestyle, but I do see the difference now as far as what their intentions are, their mindset, and sometimes even the results of their musical career. So like I'll meet musicians that can play way better than me, right? But they don't have the fortitude to get up and go to every meeting, to answer the phone every time, or to set up even a live stream like this, because they had spent more time focusing on the aptitude of their instrument. And sometimes thinking about that, it's like, dang, that sucks. I wish it was different. But at the same time, they're running a different race. They're just on a different path, right? So they may have accolades in, like, different areas. I may not be known for hitting all the right notes, but I may be known for my creativity, ingenuity, or even effort. So now you have to figure out, all right, I'm at this like fork in the road, or I'll say intersection, right? As a younger musician, and you have to figure out, all right, I'm having all these conversations with older musicians. What does it really look like when I become them? So now you have to kind of, at least in my experience, or from what my mentors have suggested, you have to look at the elderly versions of what you would like to be, and then reverse engineer how you can do what they're doing better. So I see musicians that play in churches, and some of them cannot read music. So I'll learn to read music. I see some musicians that play in bands and they don't have a decent wardrobe. So I'll make sure I invest in my wardrobe. I see older musicians that have really, really good instruments, fresh clothes, and they're gigging live, but they have a beer belly and can't walk. All right, so I'll focus on fitness. So that's kind of how I looked at it. And so far, I think I'm pretty much hitting all the marks that I can hit right now at the moment. But when you think about what you can control, that's the main thing you want to manage. And I guess that'll be the next thing we get into here. So the next thing is, so once you figure out what kind of aged musician you want to be, what kind of aged musician you are. Like maybe you are the musician who's got the instrument and you have the beer belly and you want to get fit. Now we got to figure out, all right, what actionable steps can I take to become the thing I say I want to be, right? And so just like we'll take the examples I used. So let's say you want to be the musician who's on stage, but you don't really have like your clothes together. Like you got your skills, you're coming out of school, maybe, or maybe you're getting good on your instrument, you're in a band and you're working, right? But your car is not the flyest, you don't have the flyest shoes and the flyest clothes. So what you can do, because this is actually a very important thing when it comes to developing a image for your brand as a musician, especially a front facing visible one. So if you're a guitar player, this is going to be huge. You're a vocalist, an instrumentalist of any kind, how you dress for any gig is going to matter, right? And so what you can do is, if you have income or whether you have a job or not, you can start to buy pieces of outfits or collections, right? And that way you'll build up, basically the mindset is you'll build up your wardrobe piece by piece, and then you'll have interchangeable pieces that can work in different situations. So I've heard this work in a few different examples. One example was the suit for men. And then I believe for women, it was like having kind of like a top and a bottom that can interchange between like purposes. So using the suit, you can have things like a jacket. You can start with just a jacket 1 week and then wait 2 more weeks after you get your next two checks or next check, whatever it is, however you get paid. And you can then buy a shirt. Then you can buy a tie the next time. Now, this takes time depending on how fast you want to go, or how fast you want to go depends on how much money you're willing to invest in your wardrobe, right? So as you're buying these pieces, you'll eventually develop options. So when you buy a shirt, 1 week you can buy a second shirt another week, and then you have two shirts to interchange in your suits for more gigs. Same with jackets, same with socks, same with things like that, right? So the difference between a musician like that and a musician like myself is a lot of my work is done behind the computer up until this point. Now I'm starting to be outside more, but a lot of my work is done behind the computer. So my investments went into learning like skills that involve things outside of music. Like I had to learn engineering, I had to learn sales. I didn't talk like this at a point, so I had to learn how to communicate. And so I had to learn how to, walk and talk the things that make music work alongside playing the right notes, right? So my investments went into equipment, went into education and things like that. So I bought what would be my suit and pieces of, let's say, this microphone, this stand, this desk, this keyboard, these chargers. I'm just looking at different stuff I can name, right? And so once you understand that, then you can kind of develop what kind of musician you want to look like at the end. I walked into studios with people who may not have been the freshest, may not have been the fittest, but when you walk in their studio, it's grade A. It's state of the art. It's got the best equipment in there. So they invested it in a different way. For somebody else, they may have, a pristine, perfect, maybe one of a kind instrument, right? And that instrument could very well be the, pinnacle or the very point and prime reason for success in their career, but it's the investment that they made to make sure they get the success that they want. And so the next thing that we can look at is if you have a fitness thing. Let's say if you're a musician and you want to change your body, right? Specifically like losing weight or building muscle or just eating better, right? Because if you want to change your body in a way that's like, surgical or, things like that, we can't really do much with you with that. But if you want to do something like if you want to change your posture or maybe fit your clothes better, and, for the ladies, maybe you want to have a different shape, and things like that. The idea behind the goal that you have or what you're trying to change needs to make sense for your lifestyle. And what that means is if you're let's say a pop artist, right? And you're a pop artist that your gigs involve live audiences, dancing and things like that, interacting with the crowds, lots of pictures and things like that, social media. That lifestyle involves you to pretty much look a way, but not a way that maybe pleases everybody, but you need to look away consistently. And that's where, I mean, it has to weave into your lifestyle. So the reason you need to be consistent is because it makes your brand marketable and it makes your brand easy to market. So for example, when you see artists going through just a bunch of changes, it makes it difficult for your fans to kind of like relate or like, stick with you and identify. It's kind of why you'll see some artists have the same hairstyle for many years, or maybe wear kind of like a similar style. Like maybe they wear suit jackets everywhere, or maybe this girl is always in heels, and things like that, whatever it could be. But the idea is that you want to have a consistent look because in pop music, image is a big part of the music uh, career that you'll have in that genre. And it kind of goes the same for most other genres, but I used pop because it kind of has I guess you would say, the most mainstream feel. Like most people can relate to a pop artist, but if you're let's say a hip hop artist, there's a little bit of a cultural difference in that you can be from one region to another and look very different, right? And it could still be successful. But the point is that even if you are a hip hop artist, a pop artist, a jazz musician, the image that you point people to market your music has to be consistent, right? And in order to manage that is going to be understanding how the body works as far as fitness. So one of the biggest things you're going to have to manage and control, even master, is going to be your diet. And so when it comes to, especially for people who are going to be front facing musicians, meaning you're going to be on stage, you're going to be doing interviews and things like that, you want to know what you're eating. And you want to know at least how much of it you're eating or what it does to your body when you eat it. And so this was something I started to really, really, really take consideration in for myself, because when I was getting into fitness, I was just trying stuff. Like I was just trying workouts, trying diets. But when I mean trying stuff, I mean like I was open to pretty much a lot of different things, from, alcohol, different foods, and all kinds of stuff, right? So when you realize what that's doing to your body, then you have a choice in what you want to happen to your body. And so eventually I stopped drinking, and I stopped drinking pretty much completely unless it's like a social event, and it's barely even then. So the only time I really would drink something is if literally somebody would say, "Would you like to take a shot?" And then I would be like, do I? You know, I don't really purchase it. I don't need to purchase it. I don't buy it ever. So the only reason I'm saying not really is because I don't say I won't drink it. So I guess that's the difference, right? And so being able to say that though is a privilege when you realize there are people in the world who can't say that, who, their family has to kind of hide the liquor when they come around, and, they expect them to bring drugs around and things like that. And so similar to food, you want to be able to manage these things, because food works within your body in a way that is similar to drugs, in that there is tiny, tiny little things happening. I'll say just to make it sound magical. There's tiny little things happening in your body that change your body. So it'll change your mood, it'll change how you feel. When you go on stage, if you're drunk, you'll behave differently from when you're sober versus when you're on a pill versus when you're on weed. So all these different things change how you're going to perform as an artist. And the key thing about this is that you want to age as an artist, right? And so when we think about the musicians we can speak to that are elderly, what have they done with their bodies to get to the point to where they are, right? So if you're speaking with a older, let's say, cello player, and she has like a bit of a slouch and acne, we can kind of guess what things are affecting her outside of, any medical reasons, right? But as far as like the context of this conversation, her diet would be that she probably is not eating the best foods, right? And she probably spends a lot of time at her instrument, or at least at her desk, writing hunched over a seat and things like that. So we can learn that just by meeting somebody, right? And the next thing we can think about is like how she may be dressed. So she may not be dressed, to the nines, because she may be investing more in her education. Or she could be, super, super fly and still be a great musician, and she just invested in her wardrobe. But all these things you will learn from simply just looking and observing our aging musicians and things like that. So then once you have the conversations, then you can start posing different questions, right? And some of the questions that I've realized have taught me pretty much the most from aging musicians has been questions that revolve around like, what was it like when, you know, if you can ask them to kind of express their experiences from certain time areas, you'll learn a lot, because there's actually a lot of cultural differences, probably from like every 6 or 7 years, like a very big difference from like, I don't know, you'll say it's 2025 now. So let's say like in 2011, it was a big difference. So if you went to like 1990s, 1980s, 1970s, I've met people who were born in the 1920s, the 1930s, and these people may not have been like, performing, gigging musicians, but they played the sax, or they knew how to play a thing or two on the piano. And when you have conversations with them, they start to say things like, oh yeah, I can play this, I can do that, or I have done this, or I performed here. And some have showed me pictures of them on stage performing with bands and things like that, and they're just walking around like regular people now, like just, just with us and just amongst us. And it's kind of crazy. So you can learn a lot when you realize that this person that you're talking to, who can play the guitar really, really well, also served in the Navy, and, plays for different bands and things like that, or, invested in a huge home studio or something like that, or has a really cool car and things like that, and what it took to get there. And so I think that's the best thing we can really glean from our older musicians, and how we can really understand and master aging and things like that. But if this was a conversation you guys really enjoyed, let me know, because I do want to do this again. And I will see you guys very soon with another episode of A Late Night at Dames. And we discussed aging and mastering your craft as a musician.